Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Leftovers Season 3, Episode 4, G'Day Melbourne. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of The Leftovers, so I'll have to give a spoiler warning for The Leftovers up to Season 3, Episode 4. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So I'm just going to come right out and say it. This episode blew me away. It just blew me away. It was quite an explosive episode as we see Kevin resort back to the madness we thought he left behind in Season 2. And the whole episode seemed like there was something majorly wrong with Kevin and Nora's relationship. This actually started to escalate in Episode 2, but it was really getting to high uncomfortable levels in this episode until it just exploded, and it was absolutely grand. So episode 1 was mostly a Kevin episode, and episode 2 was mostly a Nora episode. I would say Kevin and Nora shared this episode where they went off in different directions, but the main focus was on both of them in terms of both their separate adventures, but more of how this affects their relationship together. From the start of the episode, it seemed something was off about Kevin and Nora. The scam that these Becker people are running obviously got to Nora more than she's willing to admit to herself. And Kevin is definitely suffering and is just desperately trying to cling on to his relationship to Nora, who, although she denies it, is being incredibly distant. Even the scene where they had sex in the public bathroom had an air of eeriness to it, as you got the feeling that Nora was just numb and just doing it to try to feel something, kind of like when she used to have hookers shoot her. So we got a few more interactions about the book of Kevin, where Kevin tells Nora that he read it, but I kind of got the impression that he didn't. So Nora picks it up and starts reading a random part of it, and it's about the time that Kevin pushed Patty down the well. So Nora tests to see if Kevin has read it and asks him what happens next, and he tells her what happens next, that he pushed the little girl down the well. But I don't think that's because Kevin knew that what would happen because he read the book. I think he knew that because, you know, it's what happened. But it's interesting that Nora said something to the effect of, "Oh, I can't believe the shit that Matt comes up with," meaning that Kevin never told her the story about what happened in the afterlife. So it's funny that Matt, John, and Michael know all about it, but Nora doesn't, and she doesn't even consider the possibility that Kevin believes what happened in the book actually happened. But then after Nora goes to work, we see Kevin reading the book, so I believe this is him reading it for the first time. As he reads it, we see flashbacks of these events that it describes, so in a way I think this is him coming to terms with what happened. So getting back to Nora, I thought it was very interesting that she smuggled the money that she needed to get into the project by taping it to her. I was wondering why they were paying so much attention to her going through security, but then it made sense when you realized she was smuggling money. So she was really nervous but trying not to show it, and I think the actor played this really well. But it was really interesting when Kevin found out what she was doing, because there was a limit to how much money you can bring. He was like, "Well, why didn't you just give me half of it?" And she was just like, "Huh." So this tells us several things. It could mean that she didn't trust Kevin enough to give him half of the money, or that she simply got a thrill out of taking the risk. Could be both. I don't know, but it seemed like she hadn't even considered giving him half of it. Of course, if she did give him half, then she would have to tell him about the Becker guys, and maybe she was trying to avoid that. But Kevin finds out anyway, so she has to tell him, but it didn't seem that she was being entirely forthcoming, as she wasn't being honest about the fact that her work actually didn't send her there. So the big question is whether or not Nora really wanted to bust these people for lying, or if she actually wanted to go where the departed went. After seeing episode 2, I was convinced that she just wanted to take them down, as she was depicted as having no tolerance for bullshit, as was evident by the fact that she told the truth about Tower Man, even though it pissed everyone off. But after seeing this episode, I'm not so convinced anymore, and I would in fact say a little from column A and a little from column B. I think she was telling herself she wanted to expose them as frauds, but deep down, part of her wanted to believe them because she wanted to go wherever her children went. Because when they told her that she had to be on the bus or she'd never see them again, and then the young mother tried to get her to look after her baby, which would force her to miss the bus, Nora went out of her way to make sure she didn't miss the bus, going as far as to run in with the baby and just drop it off to the mother and then run back out and bang on the bus doors. So this just goes to show how important it was for her to meet these people. So you have to think that this motivation could have been just a desire to expose a scam, but to actually see if this was real. So when she arrives, she meets the two scientists, Dr. Eden and Dr. Becker. Dr. Eden seems hospitable, but Dr. Becker doesn't seem to like her very much and seems constantly, making cracks on Nora in another language. Now, at first, I thought Dr. Becker didn't like Nora because she knew that she was a scam investigator, and she thought that she was just there to expose them. But as the episode went on, I changed my mind. I didn't really feel that was the case. I think they both didn't care that she was a scam investigator, and they could read her and recognize that she genuinely wanted to go, even if she was still lying to herself about it. I think Dr. Becker didn't like her for the exact reason that they said, because she didn't think Nora was ready. Because it was interesting when Nora brought up Kevin, as she thought that that might be a problem, and they were just like, oh, we know all about Kevin and we're not worried. That was really interesting, because they knew that she wasn't invested in Kevin and that she'd leave him in order to be with her children again in a heartbeat. So after a series of extensive tests, they seemed ready to move on and say that they just need to ask her a question. And as soon as they said that, I was just waiting for them to ask her if she would kill a baby to cure cancer. So in the previous episode, Kevin Garvey Sr. came across some man who poured gasoline all over himself and was prepared to light himself on fire. And when Kevin Sr. tried to talk to him, he said that they didn't take him. And then he asked Kevin Sr. if he'd kill a baby to cure cancer, to which Kevin Sr. answered no, and he said, that's what I said, and then he set himself on fire. So in my review for that episode, I dismissed that scene as pretentious Lindelof nonsense. However, several other people were theorizing that this guy was rejected by the Mark Linn-Baker people, and were predicting that they would ask Nora the same question. So even though I didn't say this in my initial review, once I heard this theory, I thought it made a lot of sense. So as soon as Dr. Eden said they just had one question for her, I knew what that would be. What I didn't expect, though, is that when Nora answered yes, they would reject her. Because if that dude who burned himself was indeed talking about the same people, which it seems pretty conclusive that he was, then he answered no and was rejected. And so when Nora answered yes, I thought she'd be accepted, but she was rejected as well. So this could mean several things. It could be because Nora answered, of course, absolutely, that was the wrong answer, and they were looking for something more middle of the road, like I don't know, or I can't decide, or that kind of answer. Or it could mean the answer is based on the person, and for some people they want a yes answer, and for others they want a no answer. Or it could mean that the whole question is just an excuse to turn people down, and that they'll turn people down regardless of what they answer, and the whole thing is a scam to get people's hopes up, and there is no machine. and that all these testimonies were fake, and when they said that Marklyn Baker passed through, they were full of shit, because nobody passes through, because they always reject every single person on that question, no matter what they say. So now, why exactly would they do this? I'm not sure. It wouldn't be much of a scam since they actually don't take anyone's money, but it could be it's kind of like the scam that Laurie and John are running, because they don't get any money from it either, as they shred all the money that they get. They just do it to help people. But if that's the case, then it's a hell of a lot more sinister, seeing how one guy set himself on fire after being rejected, and Nora was pretty goddamn upset. So if this is the case, it would be a pretty fucked up scam. I'm actually leaning more in this direction, but I'm not completely sold on it, and of course it's possible this may never be answered, as this is The Leftovers after all. But it is interesting that the way Dr. Eden and Dr. Becker were behaving, and certainly made it seem like they at least actually believe the story that they're selling. But of course, this could all be part of the act. Such as Becker talking about how most likely everyone is being sent to space. And it was interesting when Dr. Eden was talking about the creator of the project and how he went through, and as soon as she said that, Dr. Becker snorted and then told Nora that if she saw him, to tell him that they said hello and that Finland won the World Cup. So this is obviously some kind of inside joke that Nora and also we the audience don't really get. I do hope that they reveal the significance of that remark at some point, but then again, this is The Leftovers, so probably not. So it is telling how upset Nora was when she was rejected. This is when it became extremely apparent to me that this is about a lot more than simply exposing a scam, and that she actually wanted to go even if she didn't admit it to herself, because there's no way she'd be that upset if all she wanted to do was expose them. However, when she got back to her hotel room, we saw her yelling at someone on the phone who works at her department, and she was absolutely desperate to take these people down and expose them as frauds. But this was simply spite, because she resented being rejected and thus wanted to expose them as frauds as some sort of revenge. But there's no doubt that had they accepted her, she would have won. I think even Kevin knows this, as when he left he said, "Oh, go be with your children," because I think he realized that she wasn't really living anymore and was just letting her children's disappearance consume her. But before I get into that final scene, let me loop back around to talk about Kevin's storyline, which was also very interesting. So his adventure starts off when the TV in his room turns on and he can't turn it off. TVs in hotel rooms have played a vital role on the show before, so I saw this as pretty significant. And we get a little cameo about that police chief named Kevin that Grace and her friends killed, and also a mention of Kevin Garvey Sr. and how he's missing. I love how this story was introduced by the host saying, "Oh, don't watch this if your name is Kevin." Of course, that really got Kevin's attention. It was interesting earlier how Nora asked him if he wanted to go see his father, as she assumed that's why he came to Australia with her, but he made it clear that he had absolutely no desire to see him. However, he did seem rather interested when the news said he was missing. No doubt he was worried about him, but not too much, as he didn't focus too much on that, but instead on the fact that he saw Evie on TV standing in the crowd holding a sign, and that's what sent him into a fury. Now, it's interesting that he tried to talk to her through the TV, just as he talked to his dad through the TV in the afterlife, but that didn't work, so he decided to go down there where it was being filmed and see it for himself. So a while ago, when I read the synopsis for this episode, which stated Kevin will see an unexpected person in Melbourne that reminded him of the events in Jordan 3 years ago, I assumed he would see David Burton, the Australian mentioned several times in Season 2, who was able to come back to life, whom we are all pretty certain was the same man he met in the afterlife that told him he needed to sing in order to get back. But No, turns out it wasn't him, it was Evie. It does make me wonder if we'll see David Burton again at all. I would hope so, as he seems rather an important figure to the story in Australia. Anyway, it turns out it was Evie, so he goes down to the place where they're filming the show, looking for her, and eventually finds her and confronts her. Now, what's really interesting is Kevin at first assumed that only he can see her and knows the same kind of ghost that Patty was, and is actually surprised when that other guy can see her. And it's a bit ironic how absolutely insane Kevin is acting, and quite aggressively towards that girl that he thought was Evie. It actually kind of reminds me of that scene from season 1 when some random naked guy was yelling at Christine for being in his dreams and eventually attacked her. In this scene, Kevin would be the naked guy. He's acting just as aggressively crazy, and anyone else would see him as an asshole. So he calls Laurie to tell her that Evie is still alive and in Australia. So we get another scene of Laurie and John pulling their scam, but we see when a client asks about a loved one who departed, they absolutely refuse to touch it. In fact, Laurie keeps saying abort. I wonder if this is just an interesting tidbit to show that the departure is still taboo, or if this will pay off in some larger significant way later on. Probably not, but who knows. Anyway, Laurie gets the call from Kevin and of course doesn't believe him about Evie, so he sends her a picture and she has a vitriol reaction. And as soon as I saw that, I thought to myself, I bet that picture isn't of Evie and that's why she's reacting that way. But then Laurie told him it was, which kind of irritated me because I hate the TV trope of when a character knows something that someone else knows but refuses to tell them. But more than that, I think this was the wrong decision for her. Later, she tried to justify this by giving a callback to what she said about Dean in episode 1, that when someone is suffering a delusion, you don't tell them they're delusional because that would have monstrous results. That being the case, I still think it was a huge mistake for her to indulge him because that just made things worse. He became even more upset and crazed. Had she tried to talk him down, she might have diverted some of his behavior. Which leads to, this for Kevin to confront the girl he thinks is Evie at the library, and Laurie urging her that she agrees to actually see him, and so she indulges that she is Evie, just as Laurie told her, and because she said that that he'll simply go away, which of course he doesn't, because that's quite a dumb thing for her to say. I actually feel really sorry for this girl in the scene. She was kind enough to speak to Kevin when she didn't need to because she felt sorry for him and wanted to help, but once they were in that small room and he started going crazy, you could feel that she was terrified and concerned for her well-being, as Kevin was acting mighty aggressive, and knowing what she knew was, he was acting like an absolute insane madman. So it was actually brave of her to stay there with him, but I have a feeling she didn't try to leave while he was talking to Laurie because she was afraid of provoking him and she didn't want to cause an incident. And once he saw that look in his eyes where she recognized that he could see that she wasn't Evie, she knew it was okay to leave then. It's interesting that the show had the line in the first episode about John saying he believed Evie was still alive, so that introduced doubt in the audience mind, so that in this episode we'd be open to the possibility that she was still alive and this girl was in fact Evie. But that's all I think it was, a red herring, as I do believe that she is dead as dead can be. Even when I was watching these scenes with her, I was thinking to myself, how in the hell could she survive that explosion? But turns out she didn't. This, of course, freaked Kevin the fuck out, as he thought he was seeing dead people again like he did with Patty. And when he gets back to the hotel room and Nora asks him to tell her what's wrong, and he's, and says that he can tell her anything, Kevin replies that he can't because the last time he told her she was seeing dead people, she just left him. And that's actually a good point. It's obvious throughout this episode that Kevin is afraid of losing Nora, but in this moment he had enough. And it was interesting interesting seeing the relationship between these two characters come to a head when they both have had horrendous days. But it's interesting how the conversation flows away from their respective horrible days and turns into a heated argument about how they never talk. And Nora finally lets Kevin have it about the book because she thinks it's that he secretly enjoys it. And I absolutely positively love Kevin's response where he's like, enjoy it. I fucking love it. It's riveting. And then he proceeds to light it on fire. This was just simply an amazing scene. Absolutely amazing. It's interesting how Nora is actually partly correct, even if Kevin won't admit it to himself, that he does in some way believe in this book, as we saw how he had the chance to burn it, but didn't. So when he did burn it this time, I believe he was trying to convince Nora, but more importantly, himself, that he doesn't care about it, when really he does. But what's interesting to remember about the scene is that Nora doesn't know that the book depicts true events, and Kevin is still trying to come to terms with the significance of these events, and Kevin absolutely doesn't feel close enough to her to tell her about it, as he's probably afraid that she'd simply leave him again. So when he burned the book, he said that they never have to talk about it again because they never talk about anything. And that's the exact impression I got from their relationship throughout the season, is that they never talk about anything important and it's all just superficial. Now, their relationship wasn't always like this, and it used to be really caring. So the question is, when did it decline? And I think that this is answered in the scene when Kevin asks if there's anything she wanted to talk about, and she asks him, why didn't he stop her from giving up Lily? And there it is when they gave up Lily that the relationship went downhill, because really it was the discovery of Lily that made her whole again after her children departed. So after she had to give up Lily, the hole returned. And she found the idea of having another child terrifying, as she was just afraid of losing it again. And of course, in this absolutely amazing scene where Kevin and Nora are having it out, as a fire rages in the background, Kevin tells her that she'd probably just give that baby away too, because she wants to wallow in her pain and doesn't want to be okay. And I love the wording of this, because this harkens back to Jill's storyline in season 1, where she was insistent that nobody could be okay. And for a while there, it seemed like Nora was okay, but Kevin has noticed that she isn't, and furthermore refuses to be. Now, his words were really harsh, and I don't entirely agree with every word of it, but he's definitely hit on some truths. So he finally accepts the disaster the relationship has become and simply leaves. And again, this scene was just amazing, as the book just burned in the background and they didn't even attempt to put it out. And after Kevin left, the smoke alarm went off and Nora just sat there and smoked while a fire burned in her room. Such an iconic scene, and it was shot beautifully. It reminded me a lot of this popular meme that has been floating around the internet that shows a cartoon dog sitting in a room that's on fire and he's just saying everything's fine. That's pretty much what Nora was doing here. So when Kevin gets outside, he asks for a cab, but the valet says that there are no cabs because of the explosion, and we see Kevin looking up at the building while fire trucks arrive. So it's obviously more than just the burning of one book for all these fire trucks to arrive. The explosion perhaps referred to another thing that happened in the building. Perhaps not, perhaps a bigger issue, because Kevin Sr. shows up. He explains to Kevin Jr. that all the planes have grounded. So maybe it's a different explosion, has something to do with why planes are grounded. So obviously there's been some sort of incident, but we still don't know what exactly this is. But I have no doubt this will be made clear in the following episode. But it is interesting, because some people are saying that they're sure that this explosion was not at the hotel. But it's interesting that Kevin keeps looking up at the building, but we don't see what he's looking at, so we don't know what he's looking at. I don't know. So speaking of Kevin, Garvey Sr., he shows up with Grace and reveals that he saw him on TV and immediately went searching for him, and he asks Kevin if he's alone, to which he says that he is. Even though he came with Nora, it reveals that he feels she's not really with him and that he is now truly alone. But Kevin Sr. hugs him and tells him he isn't alone anymore, so he gets into the car with him and leaves. So this right here is confirmation to me that my assessment of the end of last week's episode was correct insofar as Kevin Sr. did realize that it wasn't his singing that needed to save the world, that it's his son's ability to come back from the dead that was important. Towards the beginning of that episode, Kevin Sr. said that he didn't want his son anywhere near Australia, but I suspected that he changed his mind at the end of that episode and in fact saw his son as the Messiah figure that Matt did. And this is confirmation in this episode, as he was very clearly happy, in fact ecstatic, over the moon to see his son. I can just imagine Kevin Sr. sitting with Grace telling her how important his son is and how he is the Messiah from the book who can come back from the dead, when all of a sudden he just appears on TV in a show being filmed in Melbourne, apparently not too far from where they are, and he'd just be like, holy shit, and he'd take it as yet another sign that this was meant to be, as again, it's on TV, just like the chicken he saw that led him on the quest. However, a good argument could be made that the events in Kevin's storyline was divine intervention, or God's plan, or whatever you want to call it. Because first, the TV in his room mysteriously turns on all by itself, and it won't turn off, and is on just long enough for him to see Evie, which drives him, to go to where the show is being filmed to look for her, and it's because of this that Kevin Sr. sees him on TV and figures out where he is. So an argument could be made that the whole purpose of Kevin seeing Evie was so Kevin Sr. could find him, as they have divine work to do in order to save the world. Again, the show loves to play with the line between science and faith, but in some cases, such as Kevin's journey in the afterlife, they make it clear that it is a matter of faith or mysticism. So I do think that's the same case here, that this was divine powers or whatever driving Kevin to his father, and perhaps even driving Kevin and Nora apart. But of course, there's still a sense of ambiguity to this, because there always is. So Kevin was very much a broken man at the end of the episode, so I get the impression he'll be all on board with whatever his father proposes, but that's just my guess. So my rating for G'Day Melbourne out of 10 is a 10 the best. At the risk of hyperbole, I dare say this was one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. I was absolutely blown away by this episode. It was engaging from start to finish and featured several absolutely amazing scenes, none the least being the ending scene where Kevin and Nora finally have it out while book burns in the background. Such an amazing scene, such an amazing episode. I'm disappointed that next week's episode will be a Matt episode, because I really want to see what would happen with Kevin and his father. But you know what they say, good things come to those who wait. Either way, if this episode is any indication, I am sure the ending of this season is going to be fucking spectacular. So that's it for my review of G'Day Melbourne. Be sure to check back here every week as I continue to review episodes of The Leftovers, and also be sure to check out my channel as I do more videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Better Call Saul, The 100 Since 8, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.